Alright, so this is my third attempt at doing a weekly sketch session today. Our video keeps being taken down because of the model footage, I guess. So I'm just not going to stream the model footage. So if you just want to watch me draw how I practice torso anatomy drawing, I can't even think straight anymore, then hang out for the next 40 minutes or so, and hopefully you'll learn something. So I'm going to start my my footage on my end that I will be drawing from, and you'll just be seeing my drawing pad. So let's transition this. There we go. Alright, so I wish you could draw alongside with me. That was the whole fun idea. But I'm not going to give up. I'm going to figure this out somehow. So I'm still doing some gestures, warming up. And when I do draw gestures, I like to really use a material that I love. If you're trying to get into your drawing groove, there's no use in using materials that are giving you a headache, right? I'm just going to look over here real quick what's happening. Alright, so let's keep going. My center line established. So as I was saying earlier, I'm really only interested in the big picture when I draw the gesture, like all the essential stuff, little parts of the body that tell me the orientation. That's why I put that little center line in there. The directions of the body. How long is that limb? Let's scoot that over a little bit more. And what I like to do as well is I like to remind myself to stay visually zoomed out, because in the end a gesture is all about the big picture, how the pose looks in one glance. And if you allow your eyes to just kind of scan the body, like body segment to body segment, without constantly zooming back out, you'll end up with a drawing that looks disjointed or that has poor proportions. So I like to go in layers. The first pass is basically linear, where I just kind of draw rhythmic marks. Then I switch into shape. And lastly, if I have time, I'll build some form. So a gesture to me is a great exercise in distilling the figure into its abstract elements. And to some people that doesn't sound very exciting. They just want to draw bodies with names, and I totally get that. If you had told me when I started figure drawing that it's exciting to just think about the body in terms of rhythms, I would have said that they're crazy. So no, I think it's beautiful because there are eyes and there's hair and I don't know, all the things. But I will make the case, if you do learn to view whatever it is you're drawing, not in terms of the names we attach to it, but more in terms of the formal qualities, we art nerds call them, like what shapes, what length, what value. What happens is that you detach. You mentally detach or emotionally detach from how you think something is supposed to look. And anytime we think something is supposed to look a certain way, like an arm is supposed to have a certain length, then we stop seeing what's really in front of us. And so when we have a foreshortened pose, let's say, we won't reflect that accurately because of our assumptions about how long an arm is supposed to be. So if you, instead of thinking arm, you think, oh, this rhythm is kind of C-curved and it's quite long in comparison to this other rhythm, then you have a much better chance at being more objective or truthful. Objective sounds so stale. So I see that somebody's watching. I said earlier, I keep getting kicked off the streaming platform because of showing the model footage for some reason. So I'm just not showing the footage, I'm just streaming my drawing process. So if that's of interest to you, just kind of watch me draw and watch me riff on what I'm thinking about as I'm drawing, then awesome. And I'll try and figure out a way so I can still share stuff to draw from for all of us for the next ones. So when I draw gestures, I'm not concerned with details, as in all the bumps I see along the outer edge. I'm not concerned with light and shadow. I'm just trying to find descriptive shorthands that don't water down what it is that I'm looking at. So when I draw a belly button, which you might say, well, but that's a detail, isn't it? I draw it because I use it as a continuation of my center line. So a center line is a useful element to include in your gesture because it helps translate how the body is rotated, if it's rotated angling at us or away from us. And what I was saying earlier is also, rather than thinking about the arm in a gesture drawing in terms of bumpity bumps like this, I'm creating fluid channels. And I think I'm actually in a longer pose right now. Let me just switch to a different pose. All right, so now I have a longer pose in front of me. I think it's about 5 minutes. It's a back pose. So you'll see. So if my purpose of starting a drawing is to practice anatomy, I keep that purpose at the forefront of my mind. However, I still am mindful of my drawing process. As in, like, I'm not immediately jumping in and drawing muscle shapes, because then I'll just end up with a disconnected mess. I'm still beginning with kind of a gestural lay-in. And that lay-in serves the purpose of not just establishing the pose, but kind of building the canvas that I'll be working on. It's light. I can easily change it if need be. And once I like this, then I allow myself to get into the second phase. And the second phase is when I'll, rather than just thinking in terms of shape and proportion, I'm starting to think about the underlying structure. So I'm thinking about, okay, I know that there's a rib cage under here, and I'm looking for clues on the body where that rib cage ends. And then I also know that there's a pelvis. And I begin lightly and generally, just kind of with ovals. So this part is called, you're paying attention to your three major masses: head, rib cage, pelvis. You find their shape, you find their orientation, left to right. And once you have that, let me think about this here. Then you can start working on making it like orienting it three-dimensionally in space and layering more muscles over it. So since I'll be working kind of in the upper torso area here, I'm building all my groundwork, including a simple arm form, a container for what the arms are up to. And in this case, the elbow is pointing at me here. This one is kind of moving away, so I'm using these cylinders to do that. Okay. Think about how the neck is a tube, and that's inserting into my rib cage egg here. Next thing is I'm looking at landmarks. So on a back pose, a key landmark aside from your spine are the scapula, your shoulder blades. So out of all the bumps that you see on the body, you need to learn to see the right kind of bumps. The bumps that belong to the scapula. So there's often a little dimple at the bottom of the shoulder blade. Then there's often a ridge running along, like kind of almost parallel with the spine. whether it's a highlight ridge or a little shadow ridge. And once you have those two, the shoulder blade is kind of like a right angle triangle, and it has this spine coming off of it with this little hockey stick like hook kind of aiming towards the front. So if you lift your shoulder up, or let's say it like this, if you lift up your elbow, you know how you get this crease on the top of your shoulder? That's that part here. That's a acromion process. So I'll spell it out. So if you do some studying right now, look for that name in your book, acromion process. Okay, then so I have my landmark on the left side. Now I'm going to look for the landmark on the right. Again, I'm looking kind of for a shadow, like a little dimple here. Another good way to kind of find those dimple shadows is if you're looking at your rib cage egg, they're halfway down. Halfway down, that rib cage egg is where you should see some dimples or bumps that give you the bottom tips of your shoulder blade. And again, then I go up vertically, kind of parallel with the spine, looking for either a highlight ridge or a shadow ridge there. And so now I have my underlying structure that I need to get into some muscles. So these, when I do these kind of anatomy practice drawings, they're never pretty. They're not meant to be a finished result. They're the equivalent of going to the gym and working out a certain muscle group, or working on endurance. You know, it's nothing like going to the gym. That's not a performance. I mean, for some people it is, but it's a practice that you do with another. It'll serve a bigger purpose, right? You go to the gym to stay healthy, to get stronger, to have more endurance, all those things, but it's not something that you expect people to pay for to see you do that. But let's say when you go then on a hike, something that's fun, now you've built the endurance necessary by going to the gym. So for us, this is the equivalent. By doing these kind of schematic drawings, you're building your understanding. So here I was working out the trapezius muscle, and now on my screen the pose has changed. So in case you want to look this up in the book, trapezius, it's kind of like this muscle that looks like this. Like if you see a perfect back view, kind of has like this funky dagger shape. Like if this is the hilt of the dagger, this is the guard of the dagger, and then here's the point. That's the shape. And then there's this little diamond cutout for where your 7th cervical neck vertebra is. So I'm going to switch my paper and go to the next pose. And I have a front pose next, similar length. Alright, I'm going to draw it just a little bit bigger. So again, I'm beginning loose and light and gesturally. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm kind of pausing and I'm checking in and I'm asking myself, do I like how I captured this pose. In particular, I'll look at proportions at this phase. So right now I'm kind of getting the sense that he's a little wide in here. So I'm going to keep an eye on that and consider narrowing this in. So when students tell me, oh, I can't get proportions right, or what tips do you have for capturing accurate proportions, it's not so much about having a special secret technique that nobody else knows about. It's more about building in moments of assessment in your drawing process. Remembering that once you've drawn for about a minute, you're gonna stop yourself and assess, lean out, zoom out, see how things feel. And that is the hardest part, believe it or not, because that's when you have to face your own shortcomings. It's like when I'm in class, in a university classroom. I'll say, okay, everybody, time to step back. And then nothing happens. It's like, no, I mean it. Everybody step back. It's like nobody wants to see their mistakes. It's painful. All right, so I'm getting sidetracked on the head here. Let me get back in here. So I'm doing my 3 major masses now, head. I should do the rib cage since I'm focusing on torso anatomy. How do you know where to end your rib cage egg? Where the waist is the narrowest. That's where you swing through. And I find my sternum. Sternum is the breastbone. Goes about halfway down that egg, and you get that thoracic arc, that arc where the ribs end. And I need my clavicles in a front pose because that's what a lot of the chest muscles grab onto. Now the thing about the shoulder girdle is it's very flexible, as in movable. Like as soon as we lift an arm up, what's happening with your collarbones, like they'll go with it. So don't just, again, don't assume, don't expect a body part to behave a certain way. Always kind of check in, okay, is the arm lifted? All right, that means that the clavicle, it might have a little angle to it. And, all right, so I have my landmark set up, I have my simple forms set up, and so I don't know how much time I have left on this pose. So I'll start with the pectoralis muscle on this one. Pectoralis muscle, if this is the thoracic arc, it ends slightly above the thoracic arc. I don't know if you can hear my cat. She has her meow session at around this time. So once I know where the end of the pecs are, I put an arc, that's kind of an arc going around this rib cage egg. And then I kind of, with ovals, sketch a very gestural shape. So the pectoralis grabs onto these ribs in the front of the rib cage. As the rib cage turns to the side, they don't attach anymore to the ribs. And then they become this tail, and that tail aims at the front of the arm. So it becomes that flap, the front flap of your rib cage, of your armpit. So if you hollow out your armpit and grab onto that flap in the front, that tail here, this here, is part of your pectoralis muscle. So see, now I have the shape of it, 2D shape of it. And this tail stretches if the arms are out like this. If the arms relax down, this tail shortens, and this looks more like a little square packet. And to make this feel like it has more volume, you can use some plane changes or also some cross contours. Shading is also another way of creating form. It's often a little way for people to hide, though, what they don't understand. So if you want to deal with true draftsmanship, you got to learn how to use plane changes and wrapping lines. And I might have a video actually on my channel that it goes more in depth on how to work with plane changes and wrapping lines. All right, so I can even color this in. So pectoralis major. Let me tell you a little bit more about, so I told you that this is about the 6th or 7th rib here where it ends. And again, it's grabbing onto the ribs on the front. And then if you look at the collarbone, you see how the collarbone, let me make this a little bit bigger. The collarbone has kind of like almost like this S shape to it, like it sets back and then over. The pecs, they grab onto that in the center, about 2/3, something like that. They leave a little gap in here before the next muscle grabs onto it. And then, as I said, it grabs onto the front of the upper arm bone. Okay, let me switch the paper. Okay, so now I have a seated pose. We're mainly seeing the side, but a little bit of the front as well. So as I said earlier, with these gestures, I'm trying to set up the whole. I'm giving myself a canvas to work with. And now I'm pausing, and now I'm zooming out, and I'm kind of assessing, do I like the width to height relationship? Does he need to lean more? So before I get too locked in, as I'm in this light phase, that's where I want to make my corrections, right? Because nobody wants to make adjustments once we commit it to our marks. So while my marks are light and soft, I can still adjust things easily. And again, it's a matter of remembering to check rather than having special tricks up your sleeve. I mean, there are a few tricks, but the remembering is a big part. Okay, so I'm working now on my 3 major masses: head, rib cage. Don't have my pelvis set in yet. So now that I have my 3 major masses placed, I'm paying close attention to the gap in between the rib cage and the pelvis. So you want to look for that frontal hip bone. Where's that, to know how high to place this. And now I'm going for my landmarks again. Since I'm focusing on upper torso, I need my sternum, that breastbone. And that's essentially your center line, telling the viewer, hey, we're seeing a lot of this side, not so much of that side. You want to place that mindfully. And then that thoracic arc. if I could see through, I would see the underside there. Then I need the clavicles, those collarbones. And again, I'm checking what are the arms up to. Since I understand that the clavicles are affected by the arm's movement, I don't just want to assume that they're kind of horizontal. Now the other thing that happens in the current pose I'm looking at is his torso is turned away like this. And so this clavicle, this collarbone is longer, this one is shorter because of perspective, right? That's how perspective works. Whatever angles away from us visually becomes shorter. Okay, so I've got my landmarks. Let's work on, okay, so here let's add this little landmark too. So this is the, again, that acromion process I was talking about earlier. It's that, so on your shoulders, if you grab onto your outer shoulders, that hard part, that's your acromion process. So that's a useful one, because I wanted to do the trapezius, because we talked about it earlier. It shows up in the front as well. It's mainly a back muscle, but if you kind of grab onto the top of your shoulder, right in between your neck and this shoulder hub here, that hump or whatever you want to call it, that's your trapezius muscle. And it grabs onto the inside, the inner third of the collarbone. So let me color it in. Right here. So now I have the shape, and if I want to make it three-dimensional, I need to throw some wrapping lines over it. Okay, let's do, oh yeah, I need an arm cylinder to contain everything. So here on that shoulder, we also have a muscle called the deltoid, and that's kind of like a teardrop muscle that grabs onto the outer, the outside of the upper arm, halfway down the upper arm. That's where it attaches. There are three segments to it. There is a front, middle, or side, front, side, and back segment to it. Let me erase this out a little bit. And it has a noticeable top plane. Here's that front segment. So when I do anatomy studies, I'm drawing more schematic than I would if it was meant to be a finished drawing, like a beautiful drawing, because I want that clarity to myself. So see, I put in my 1, 2, 3 plane changes. So now I know, okay, this is the front plane, this is the side plane, here's the top plane. And now to make this more three-dimensional, I could put a few wrapping lines here as well. I could also work a little bit with shading. So let me color this in. I don't have different colors. Alright, so this was the trapezius and this was the deltoid. So I'm going to do one more pose and then I'll jump off. It's another front pose. Notice how I'm holding my pencil, by the way. I'm getting a lot of control by rubbing my fingers and my knuckles against the page. It's still an overhand grip, so I have a big arc that I can work with, and I can use the side of the pencil very easily like that, but also switch into using the tip of it without kind of having to contort my hand in strange ways. Okay, so even though I'm mainly focusing on the top, I like to include the whole figure just because it helps me practice seeing everything in context. So I got my gesture, I'm pausing, I'm asking myself, how do I like my proportions? How do I like the limb placement? I'm checking negative spaces to check on that. And if I feel okay with everything, I let myself move forward. Egg for the rib cage. Now I'm looking for the pelvis placement. Let's make the head just a tad bigger. So always keep improving on what you have. Now I'm looking for that first circle of the ribs. It's higher in the back, lower in the front, just like your t-shirt collar. And then I look for the center line. So the pose I currently have is a very frontal pose. So I see equal distance from the left to right. Halfway down is where the thoracic arc begins. And now I need my clavicles. So where does that clavicle end? Look for that little triangular notch under it. It ends slightly beyond that. And then you have your acromion process next to that. Okay, so I got my landmarks established, and let's see what muscle. Let's do pecs first. So I know if this is where my thoracic arc is, the pecs are slightly above that, right around here. I know they grab onto the front ribs all the way to that little notch. So I'm starting to search out the attachment points along the skeleton. Oops. Need to have a cylinder to aim this at. And now so 2/3 of that clavicle, and then it aims towards the arm. Right. Remember, it's that front flap of your armpit. You can see that on anybody, even if you have a person in front of you who's heavier set. There's the little crease there, and that crease belongs to your pectoralis, no matter how much fat is on top of it. Okay, so I have my shapes. And again, I will say it one more time, when I practice anatomy drawings, I make my shapes look more characteristic than they look in real life, because I'm trying to go for clarity instead of for detail accuracy. Now, if you have a different purpose for your drawing, like if your drawing is about a particular person and their exact physiology, I hope that's the right word, then drawing like this, how I currently am drawing, it's not the right method. So for every type of drawing, there's a different method that's more useful. Okay, next muscle. Let's go for those deltoids again. So as I said, if there's this little groove under your clavicle bone, right next to that groove is the beginning of the deltoid. The deltoid overlaps that tail of the pecs. It aims halfway down the upper arm. And it has 3 bundles. If we have a front pose, we can only see 2 of it. See the front bundle, and then a little sliver poking out behind that front bundle, which is that side bundle. Let me take out some of these marks here. Let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit on that last minute or so. Okay, and those crosshairs, they will go away after a while. Still have so much tech stuff to learn on how to get a clean output and all that stuff, but you know, gotta start somewhere. So see, now I have my deltoid shapes laid in. Notice I left that little groove open. And let's do the trapezius here. Let's get a neck tube established. So I go simple form first. And right here, it kind of looks like a coat hanger. You have the trapezius, and also on the other side. And it grabs on, so see, here's your collarbone. That trapezius grabs onto that outer third of the collarbone, but from the inside, right? And color these in. Again, want to make it a bit more three-dimensional. Put some wrapping lines over this. As I said, you can also use tone and highlights to make it pop more. But I'm into this whole idea of being a really good draftsman and not needing tone. I mean, tone is fine. There's nothing wrong with tone. I like tone too, but it's cool when you don't need to rely on that. All right, so let me click here real quick. All right, so this was the end of my practice session. I hope you got some value from watching me draw. I know it would have been more fun to have the model to draw from as well. I'll tinker with it. I'll see if I can figure out a better way of doing this. In the meantime, what I recommend is check out those 3 muscles, pectoralis, trapezius, and deltoid, 3 shoulder girdle muscles. And I like doing copies directly from anatomy books that are clear, that don't have too much detail in them. And then just writing the names to them so you remember the names, writing down the attachment points, just so like the more you do that, the more it'll get ingrained in your system, and the easier you can kind of draw from that next time you're drawing from life. Alrighty, thank you so much. I see that 4 of you are here. I'm so grateful for you. Draw with me, hang out with me, and I hope we can do it again soon. See you soon. Take care. Have a good night.